Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Go Big or Go Home. I am Old Man Troy, joined by the puppeteer, Kevin Cunningham, a.k.a. Big Cunny on Twitter. What's going on today, my friend?
NCAA basketball. That's what's going on today. That's what went on yesterday. That's what went on this past weekend for me. I've just been watching and diving into things. Not necessarily last night because I worked super early this morning. I didn't get to dive in last night, but today I've been diving more in. At least for the Big Ten. I don't have my bracket filled out or anything. I know, Troy, that you wait until Wednesday night right before everything's set in stone, which, realistically makes sense. If you're trying to win a tournament pool and figure out which upsets are most likely to happen, and you do some research here and there, makes sense that you don't have your bracket done 30 minutes after it comes out and you're solidified. But then again, people that never watch college basketball a year fill out a bracket and, win pools where there's 40 people and money on the line, and it's like, even though that's very illegal and none of it ever happens, those are the people.
No, but we have a free contest for our listeners. So before you get into it, let them know how to get to it.
Yes, if you follow our show at Youngster Old Man on Twitter, that's where you can find it. Also, if you follow Troy or I on Facebook, I know Troy put out a LinkedIn post on it, just about the link for it. I'm not going to spell out the URL, but basically I think that you can, if you were to search groups, Go Big or Go Home, that's another way to do it. But again, follow us on Twitter at Youngster Old Man. That's the easiest way to do it. That's our show handle. That's where we tweet all of our stuff. That's where we have tweeted, retweeted the link to join our free group on ESPN. Just, you have your bracket on ESPN, join group, boom, you're in. It's really that simple. So at Youngster Old Man on Twitter, myself at Kid Cunny, KIDCUNI on Twitter, at TroyRobert967 on Twitter, at No Look Passing, my personal blog. I tweeted it out there. But, again, our show handle at Youngster Old Man. It's all one word, Youngster Old Man. Follow us, don't follow us, just join our tournament group. Prove to us how stupid we are, how brilliant we are. One or the other. One or the other is going to happen. So just join. It's free.
I'm probably going for the latter. I haven't done so many of these tournaments the last few years. I had a string of years, Youngster, where I was like in the top 5 for a couple years in a row. But and that was a few years back. And now I don't know. Maybe it's my old age. Maybe it's just my old age. I haven't fared so well. And I told you my true. I'm thinking of the word. I can't think of it. It'll come to me while I'm talking. But it deals with Duke. Every time I pick Duke to win, they lose in the second or third round.
Right.
If I pick them to lose, then they'll win the national championship. So I bet you're hoping that I pick Duke to get upset.
That's true.
I bet you're hoping.
That's true. I'm a Duke. Yeah.
I don't know how I can do it. Which means that they're going to get upset. They're not winning the national championship.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just my initial thought. I mean, I've got to look at the games. I've got to go through and see who's going to be advancing. But just off the top of my head, I mean, everybody at work is asking me today, who's going to win the national championship? I said, one of 68 teams. And they're like, oh, aren't you a smarty? I'm like, no, I haven't done my bracket. And now I don't know who's going to win it. I have to look because I told half of these people, like you said, there's a lot of people that are casual basketball fans.
Right.
And I'm not. I'm a little more in-depth to it. So I've got to see the matchups.
Yeah.
You got to see who's playing well right now. I mean, there's a lot of games that I've perused, and I'll tell you, our Marquette team, Kevin, I think got the worst draw in the whole tournament. They play Murray State. Murray State's actually really good.
Yeah.
Marquette's really good too, but that, to me, could be one of the toughest first-round games out there. That's one of those wonderful 5-12 games.
Yeah. Marquette's been slipping up as of late, and Murray State's got maybe the number 3 pick in the draft coming up in the NBA and John Morant. So, and Marcus Howard, Marquette's, 25 point per game scorer who's, supposed to go eye to eye with him. Offensively, defensively, supposed to be an incredible matchup. He had a wrist injury recently, and he shot 1 of 15 in his last game. So if his wrist is still somewhat limiting him, and he scores 15 instead of 25, you could kiss Marquette goodbye, because Morant will.
I know it's hard to pick against my home state team, but I might. Yeah. I mean, that's one of those games. I went quickly through the game, so I know who's playing each other, but I haven't really jumped into it. But I saw that, I'm like, are you kidding me? No love for Marquette there. But this is not a Marquette show. This is a good big show. So we're going to go through the regions. We're going to do 4 mini shows, and we're going to go region by region. Some shows might take a little bit longer, depending on how many Big Ten teams are in that region. But I think it'll be interesting this week, youngsters, as we do this. So I'm going to turn it over to you. You are the puppet master. I am just a puppet in your game. You take it away. Let's talk about one of the regions. I'm going to let you pick. Just fire away.
Yeah, so there's 8 teams in the field. I just want to go through this really quickly. The Big Ten tournament, people know, how it obviously lasted and how it ended. Nebraska went on a little run getting to the 3rd game against Wisconsin. They upset Maryland. That was cool to see. And both Nebraska and Indiana are in the NIT. No Big Ten teams in the CIT, but Nebraska and Indiana. And I actually looked at the CIT bracket, Troy, and it literally was all mid-major schools. And I don't know if they have changed it or if that's all how it's always been. I've never really seriously looked into the CIT before. But I checked out the CIT field just to make sure there was no Big Ten team, and there wasn't. Like, it was literally all mid-majors. So I just figured I'd point that out there. But Nebraska, Indiana, also in the NIT. For whenever those nights are that the NIT is actually on, you can see Nebraska or Indiana. And, again, they're both solid teams. We've talked about them, obviously, for hours on the show over the course of the college basketball season.
What's cool about that, youngster? It's 8 in the NCAA tournament, 2 in the NIT, correct? Am I doing my math right? Is that 10 teams?
8 plus 2. Hold on. Carry the 1. Yeah.
Are you going to use a calculator or what?
No, yeah, I just had to carry the 1 there. It took me a while.
You could take your slippers off and count on your toes.
Yeah, 10 teams. And I think we talked about that 10-team mark earlier this season.
Yeah, like maybe on the first show.
We said
10 quality teams.
10 quality teams. Yeah, 10 teams from this conference could make the NCAA tournament. We weren't really far off since 8 made it and 2 made the NIT. So our preseason predictions, as far as, where these teams would finish exactly, nobody ever gets that right. But, again, overall, I think we had a pretty solid thought about how this conference would go altogether. So, again, if you follow – go ahead, Troy.
No, I was going to say, it's just you look at it and when we went over that show, I mean, it just goes to show why I believe the Big Ten is the best conference in America.
Yeah.
Because you look at it, 8 teams in the NCAA tournament. Now, are they all going to make noise? Probably not. But you have 10 teams playing in the postseason out of 14. That's pretty darn good.
Yep.
And we've talked about, like, Penn State was on the bottom of the barrel for how long, and they're pulling off major upsets. You can't go to sleep any team in this conference. Most other conferences, you look at those teams that are 10 through 14, and you're like, oh, my, here's an easy win. But you look at Rutgers. I know they're not playing in the postseason, so that's kind of disappointing to us because we've kind of adopted Rutgers as, like, every year. It's like, come on, Rutgers. They had a great year, in my mind, Kevin. They were finished 7-13 in the Big Ten. 7.
Yeah.
7 wins. Rutgers.
Yep.
And you got Penn State who got behind the 8 ball early in the season, and at the end of the season was playing well. They were beating teams. They were actually showing, hey, here's the talent that we should have had 2 months ago. And if they would have started off that way, they'd probably be in the NCAA tournament also. But you got teams, Kevin, that on any given night home or away, this conference was very competitive, and you couldn't play below your game. And if you did, you'd lose. Being a Badger fan, happened. Happened to the Badgers. Happened to every single one of the teams. I just think this goes to prove right now, 10 postseason teams is the best conference in America. That's all I had. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. I don't know how many ACC teams made the NIT, but 7 made the NCAA tournament, and not to say that the amount of teams making the NCAA tournament means which conference is best, which is worse, yada yada. But ACC also has a few more teams than the Big Ten does as well, like at least I think 3 or 4 more teams.
And
so it's not as though
argue the ACC has 3 number 1 seeds. Yeah,
and they do.
They're top heavy. They're
right.
top heavy.
Yeah.
But we talked about this, I think, 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. If you take Pitt, who's near the bottom of the ACC, and put them in the Big Ten, that might be I don't know who they're not going to fare much better in the Big Ten.
No. Maybe they're better than Northwestern. Maybe
Northwestern, I think, could give them a game.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think Northwestern probably wins, to be honest.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. ACC is very top-heavy, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an argument. There's going to always be an argument right now in today's world between the Big Ten and the ACC. There will always be that argument. But when I look top to bottom, Team 1 to the bottom of the barrel, Big Ten, bottom of the barrel team can go anywhere and play a competitive game. Pitt played a little bit competitive, but they're not a team. I don't think Syracuse really was afraid of Pitt. I don't think North Carolina was afraid of Pitt. I mean, you look at the Big Ten, I'm not saying that Michigan State was afraid of Penn State, but if they snooze, Penn State will beat you. So,
I think they beat them. Penn State beat either Michigan or Michigan State. I don't have their schedule in front of me, but they beat one of those schools. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
All right. What else you got? Then we'll move on to our first bracket.
Yeah, I think that's it. There was nothing else crazy. Minnesota had a nice little run. Beating Penn State, which we both thought Penn State would win. Minnesota took them to overtime and won, and then they beat Purdue. Where Carson Edwards also had a little bit of an injury, back injury. Not necessarily in that game, but just recently. And it was kind of brought to attention, and it's like, well, maybe Carson Edwards, there's a little problem there, which makes sense due to how he's been shooting in the last 6-7 games. He's been very inefficient. I mean, you look at points, and you'll see 21, 25, 17. But if you look at how he shoots the ball, it's nowhere near as efficient as he should be. So if his back is truly an issue, even if it's a bit of an issue, then Purdue could, see themselves lose early, as they just lost to Minnesota in their only game in the Big Ten tournament. So just food for thought, anyway. That Nick Ward, also for Michigan State, proved he was back. Charles Matthews for Michigan proved he was back. As far as other notable injuries, I think that's kind of it. Ohio State, Caleb Wesson, he showed out against Indiana, which was obviously key in getting Ohio State into the tournament. Both Troy and I thought Ohio State would not make it, but they did. So only winning against Indiana, losing against Michigan State, that surprised me that they weren't even in a play-in game. They're just strictly an 11 seed who's in the tournament. So they're right in there in the field of the 64th. They're not even in the first 4. So they were not comfortably in, but fairly comfortably in, which surprised me anyway. But finally, let's get into the East region. For those of you who clicked on the show, the reason you are listening to this show is that you want to hear about the East region and the Big Ten teams in that region. In years past, Troy and I this is our 3rd March Madness together now doing this show. In years past, we've gone through literally every single game and picked it through and, kind of talked about everything. Those shows last forever.
And bored the listeners. We bored them.
Yeah.
It was hard to edit those shows, youngster. I think I bored myself.
Yeah, going through pick by pick, both of us, with every single game and every single region, it just takes a while. So we're going to focus this week's show on the East region. Again, we will have 3 other shows. Follow us on Twitter at YoungsterOldMan this week. 1 show about the East, 1 about the West, 1 about the South, 1 about the Midwest. We're going to do a show on each region, but we're going to focus what's ahead in this coming weekend, the first round, second round for each Big Ten team in that region. So it makes more sense for this show, a Big Ten focused show, obviously, to solely talk about the Big Ten teams and just what's ahead of them this weekend. You know, it's somewhat pointless to sit here and debate Michigan State, Duke, and, oh, my God, that's going to be amazing. Well, what if it doesn't happen, yada, yada, yada. If they were to play, that happens March 29th. I mean, that's a while from now. That's, you know, a couple weeks away. So maybe Duke loses, maybe Michigan State loses. We'll figure it out as the bracket, you know, unfolds and games are played and upsets happen, obviously. Who knows? Again, I'm a Duke fan, but they could very easily lose to Virginia Tech like they already have this year in the Sweet 16.
I know why you're doing it this way, though, youngster. You do not want to give away your picks because of our bracket.
No, I'll tell people right now. Duke, North Carolina in the final. I have Duke winning, and that's me being a Duke fan. So maybe that's, you know, seems biased. I never have Duke playing North Carolina in the title game and Duke winning. But this year, I literally think, and I put it out on Twitter before the bracket was revealed, I thought Duke was the best team coming into the tournament. I thought Gonzaga was the second best. People want to say they're not a 1 seed. That's hilarious to me. Duke's number 1, Gonzaga number 2 to me. I thought North Carolina was 3. And Duke, Gonzaga are on the same side on the left, and North Carolina's on the right with Virginia as far as the 1 seeds go. And I think North Carolina is better than Virginia. I think North Carolina is the 3rd best team in the country. So I think they're going to come out of the entire right side. I mean, that's how I did it. As far as who my championship teams are, it just so happened, you know, if Gonzaga was on the right, I would have picked Gonzaga. I was thinking the title game all year long was when Duke met Gonzaga super early this year and Gonzaga won a very close game. I thought that would be a rematch. I thought those were the 2 best teams. And North Carolina has certainly been coming on strong. I thought they were underrated all year long. But that's my championship game. Duke, North Carolina, I have Duke winning it. So if you want to copy it, feel free. But what really makes the tournament is, you know, the upsets, and winning a bracket pool is finding those upsets, finding that 11 seed that's going to get to the Elite Eight. You know, finding
bracket
that 10 seed.
Pool. Remind the listeners how to find our bracket pool, youngster.
On Twitter at YoungsterOldMan. Follow us, don't follow us. Just click on that tweet that we have out saying join our pool. It's free. It's on ESPN.
It is actually pinned on the Youngster Old Man Twitter page. So all you have to do is go to the page, right on the top, and just click on it.
At Youngster Old Man on Twitter, all one word. So especially if you have an ESPN bracket, it literally just is a matter of clicking the link and clicking join group. Then you're in. That's it. All done. So anyway, the East region, which is the top left. Michigan State, and, you know, we could talk 10 minutes about how Michigan State got quote-unquote screwed by being in Duke's region, and they talked about it, the committee talked about it, that it's not perfect to go 1 plays 8, and 2 plays 7, and 3 plays 6, and 4 plays 5. That's not how the top 8 teams are measured. That's not how this field goes. The field goes in terms of region, and they want to keep Duke in the East. It's not random where Duke can be the number 1 out west and they're the number 1 overall seed. No, they're going to be in the East because that's just geographically what makes most sense for them. That's why Virginia's in the South. That's why Gonzaga's in the West. That's why North Carolina's in the Midwest. You know, you're never going to see Gonzaga a 1 seed in the East. That's just never going to happen because they want to keep teams as close to home as possible. It seems weird having Michigan State in the East and having Kentucky in the Midwest because Michigan State's supposedly ranked higher. They also, the committee comes out every year with these teams ranked 1 through 68 and just literally how they seed them. And again, it's just never perfect because region is taken into account and geographic location. So that's that's the answer as to why. People wonder, Michigan State beat Michigan 3 times this year. Why is Michigan with the number 4 1 seed and Michigan State with the number 1 seed? Makes no sense. I agree, but the reason is because of geographic location. They sent Michigan out west. That's the point. That's the punishment for Michigan, supposedly. That's the reason why. So you can agree, you can disagree, but that's the reason why. People wondering why. That's exactly why. So anyway, for the Big Ten teams in this region in the East, how many do we have? One thing I found interesting, Troy, was the Big Ten. What region do you think the Big Ten would be most represented in? East, West, South, or Midwest?
Well, you would think it would be the Midwest, but that's not the case.
Right. No. The only team, again, 8 teams from the Big Ten, only 1 got in the Midwest, and it wasn't a top dog. It was actually the worst team from the Big Ten. It was Ohio State. That's the only team in the Midwest. So if you click on the Midwest show for Go Big or Go Home this week, it's going to be shorter than the other shows because it's just Ohio State, the 11th seed. So, we'll get into their possible matchups in the second round, obviously who they're playing in the first round in Iowa State. But that's realistically how far we're going is kind of that first weekend. We'll look ahead a little bit on this week's show at some teams maybe, but we're trying to keep things week to week, trying to keep these shows shorter than they have been in the past anyway. So this East region for the Big Ten, it has Michigan State as the 2 seed. It has Maryland as the 6, and it's got Minnesota as the 10. So there's actually 3 in the East. The one interesting thing I will point out before anything else is that Michigan State's the 2, Minnesota's the 10. That means in the second round, Michigan State could play Minnesota.
Yep.
So just very random. I thought it was funny when it was being unveiled. Like, oh, that's a possible second round matchup for Big Ten team. Just thought it was odd. There's no other instance of that happening. Purdue could play Iowa, I guess, in the Sweet 16. But yeah, there's no possible other second round matchups between 2 Big Ten teams, I don't think. So just interesting. Thought it was interesting. We can start, I guess, from top to bottom, not necessarily seed-wise, but just going straight, north to south here in terms of the seeding and just how it looks on the bracket. Maryland is the 6th seed, and they play an 11 seed who is in a play-in game in Belmont and Temple. And by the time this is recording, we do not know the result of Belmont Temple. So maybe in my head I should have thought this out better. But realistically, Belmont is a team from a mid-major conference who has been really good all year, and they did not win their conference tournament. They lost to Murray State in the final, I believe. So that's how Murray State got into the field. Realistically, they were not actually going to make it as an at-large, which I thought would have been atrocious. But Belmont made it in as an at-large from that conference, which I think Belmont has been really good all year long. If you look at what Belmont is, they're just a very good three-point shooting team. They're a very good offensive team. They always are with that coach. I don't have his name in front of me, but Belmont is always winning like 27-plus games a year, like always. They might not make the tournament every year, but it seems like more often than not these last 10 or so years, Belmont's pretty good. So you don't see Belmont playing Duke much. You don't see Belmont playing North Carolina. You don't see Belmont playing Michigan State, Michigan much, because there's no point in scheduling Belmont. That's not good for you as Duke, Michigan, any of these blue bloods, so to say, in college basketball. It's kind of like college football, how Alabama just basically schedules a bunch of cupcakes because there's nothing in it for Alabama. They already know the public perception is they're the best team. So why necessarily challenge yourself and open yourself up for a loss? There are obviously positives to doing so, but that's why they do it. That's why Belmont doesn't, these last 5-10 years, that's why they're not playing phenomenal non-conference schedules, because no one wants to play them. That's basically why. So they got in as an at-large, which I think is awesome. They were one of 2 teams to make it as an at-large. I don't remember if Wofford was the other. There's some other mid-major that didn't win their conference tournament, not counting Gonzaga. Gonzaga actually lost in the final to St. Mary's, the West Coast Conference. But not counting Gonzaga, there was another mid-major team that won it as an at-large, or got in as an at-large, I should say. And just so people know, I'll be transparent. Belmont plays Temple in the play-in game to see who plays Maryland. I didn't even look at Temple. Again, I just believe in Belmont. I think they're better than whatever team they're going to match up against in the playing game. So I've got Belmont winning that. Not that that matters on this ESPN bracket pool. It's just Belmont/Temple. But Belmont, for me, is playing Maryland in the first round. So that for me is going to be interesting. I was just talking about Belmont and what they are. And for Maryland, realistically, this game is probably a coin flip to me. I mean, either Maryland kills them on the glass, which Maryland, I think, is a top 10 rebounding team, top 10, top 15 all year long. And part of that's Bruno Fernando, part of that's Jalen Smith. They just have good bigs, and Bruno Fernando's an NBA-level big. That's kind of the issue with Belmont. You know, they're a smaller team in general, but they're a better shooting team. They're not going to turn it over as much. That's been the real problem with Maryland all year long, is they just turn it over too much. So that's, you know, if you turn it over against a really good offense that can shoot threes, you could be in trouble. So it's one of those 6-11s, and I think over the last 5 years, I think it is, 11s have actually beaten the 6 more than the 6 has beaten the 11. I think it's one of those weird instances where that happens. People talk about 5-12, but 6-11 realistically, and it makes more sense, actually happens more as of late than 5-12. But anyway, Belmont, again, this game realistically, it just comes down to Maryland taking care of the ball, to me. If they do, they'll win the rebounding battle. They could crush Belmont on the boards, and that ends up being the difference. But if Maryland doesn't turn the ball over 20 times, you know, you should see Maryland probably win. But Belmont's better than an 11 seed. And Maryland, when they're turning the ball over, they can lose to just about any team in the Big Ten. So let alone a team that's actually pretty good. And that's Belmont to me. And if Temple were to beat Belmont, then Temple's obviously playing good basketball at that point. So to play a couple days later against Maryland, Temple would be feeling pretty good about themselves. I don't want to say that I have picked Belmont or Maryland at this point. I think on my bracket, actually I do have it picked. I actually have Belmont moving on in an upset. But that's fairly quick diagnosis is that Belmont's a really good guard-heavy team that will get out-rebounded, but it just comes down to taking care of the ball if you're Maryland. Curious on your thoughts, Troy, and then we can quickly look ahead to Maryland's potential second-round matchup if they make it there.
Well, this is why I wait until Wednesday night to do my pick. You're kind of stealing my thunder. Because Belmont's the type of team that can beat Maryland. They're not going to physical them up and post up and, you know, score a ton of points in the paint. But we saw what happened to Virginia last year. You get hot from the outside, and the thing is, Belmont's going to live and die by the three-pointer. That's fine. But they shoot it pretty good. And like you said, Maryland has been shaky at times. They're going to out-rebound Belmont. They'll win the rebounding battle. So if you like prop bets, I mean, look at the rebounding margin and see if there's a bet for rebounds in that game, because Maryland will win the rebound battle. Yeah. Unless there's a lot of, you know, hard iron three-pointers that bounce off the back of the iron and come out to the guards. But for the most part, Maryland's going to win the rebound battle. However, like you said, Kevin, the Achilles heel of Maryland when they lose is they turn the ball over. And sometimes they're atrocious. And when that happens, it doesn't matter if you're Maryland, doesn't matter if you're Michigan State. You turn the ball over, you put yourself behind the eight ball. And when you play against a guard-heavy team that shoots the ball well, heck, if Belmont knocks down three-pointers in a row, Kevin, that's 9 points. And if Maryland turns the ball over on 2 or 3 possessions, they're down by 6 or 7.
Yeah.
Just like that. And you know, being a former basketball player yourself, you get in a groove early, the confidence is high. You'll shoot from anywhere beyond that arc. This is, though, why I want to wait till Wednesday night to do my picks. If Belmont wins and they beat Temple, I'm with you. I think Maryland can go down. If Temple wins, I think Maryland wins. So that's why I need to see who's Maryland actually playing. I can't do a bracket right now because it does matter. Like you said, especially in today's college basketball, Kevin, we talk about these top-heavy teams. Yeah, the top, the number 1, the number 2, yeah, they're pretty solid. People are joking about Virginia. I don't think they're going down again as a number 1. I think they might have learned something from last year.
Probably.
But my point is, once you get, in my opinion, even to the 4-13s, Kevin, you've got some interesting 4-13s. 5 versus 12, we all know that history. 3-14, that's pushing her a little bit.
Every year, Troy, every year I try and pick at least a 13 to beat a 4, if not worse than that. I remember there was one year I picked, I think it was a 14 to beat a 3, and I wrote a post about it. This is going to be the upset of the tournament in terms of the first round, and it was. It was just, I did my in-depth research, and it made perfect sense as to why this 14 seed would beat, it was Cincinnati at the time, and it just made perfect sense as to why it would happen. Not to say I'm, some bracketologist genius here, but one thing I want to, I know I cut you off, I apologize. I'll keep this quick. One thing I like looking at with these huge potential upsets, and a team like Belmont against Maryland, these mid-majors playing against this major team in the first round, is the size difference. Because you can go to their roster. You can go to Belmont's roster and click on the top 7 players in terms of minutes per game who sees the court and see, hey, 6 foot, 6'1", 5'11". Who's their top rebounder? Oh, he's only 6'6". Well, that team against Maryland, who's got legitimate NBA bigs, they're not going to survive. But Belmont's 61st in rebounding. I had to look it up because I know Maryland's good inside. If Belmont had 0 inside presence and was just going to get smashed on the boards, I wouldn't pick them to win. But they shouldn't get completely annihilated on the boards. They're not tiny. That's something I always look for. If you're going to pick a 14 to beat a 3, look to see if it actually makes some sense. If they're just annihilated in terms of length and size on the inside, there's no hope at that point. That's just a random tip. Not that it always works, obviously. UMBC can beat Virginia, but that's just something I always look at if I really seriously am contemplating, and 11-6 is different, but 14s beating 3s, 15s beating 2s. I always look at 15s and 2s just because it sometimes happens. Once every 3 years or so it happens. So it's always interesting to me, but, that's just random food for thought. Is that inside battle? Make sure these mid-major teams can literally compete on the inside and on the glass.
It's a good point, youngster. To add to that, though, you have to take a look when you look at a team like Belmont that shoots a lot of threes. You have to remember a lot of those rebounds are long rebounds.
Yeah,
you know what
absolutely.
I'm saying? So do you necessarily have to match up big for big? No. If you understand rebounding and you know that you've set a play up to shoot a 3, and these kids have shot the 3 so many times, and I'm not saying they know where the miss is going to happen, but good rebounding teams, Kevin, don't necessarily just have the 7'2" guy standing in the lane grabbing rebounds. The other 4 guys are boxing out their guys, getting position for the rebound. And when you shoot 3-pointers, a lot of times it's a long rebound. And if you have taken care of your responsibility, have boxed out your man, and have position on the rim, you're going to get the rebound. it's not always going to be the 7'2" guy under the rim when you shoot a lot of outside jump shots. It's the other 4 guys that have to do their job to have a team rebounding advantage. I just wanted to throw that out there. I got nothing else about this youngster. Like I said, I got 2 ways Maryland's going. If Belmont wins, I think Belmont takes down Maryland. If Temple wins, I think Maryland moves on.
Yeah, fair enough. The other thing I look at nowadays is 3-point percentage as a team. And if it's up there, like I like for Belmont, I kind of looked, more so like they have a 6'8" senior guard. I have no idea how they have a 6'8" guard at Belmont, but they do. He averages 21 and 10. I mean, he averages 10 rebounds a game. Again, they're not going to get annihilated on the glass, but one thing I look at is 3-point percentage and how many guys can shoot the 3. If they've got 3, 4, 5 guys that can shoot the 3, that's hard to stop. So Belmont is going to be right in there with Maryland if they play them. They're not going to get smoked at all. The Vegas line for it, I mean, I'm sure Maryland would be favored by like 3-4 points. That would be my assumption. Belmont's not going to be favored, but if you're looking to take a little upset, that's absolutely one to look at. If Maryland were to get by Belmont Temple, they play the winner of number 3 seed LSU, number 14 Yale. LSU is talented. That's they're a 3 seed for a reason. But they are playing Yale, and I know nothing about Yale at this time. But from what I have heard, is that people like Yale a lot. So people are contemplating that 14-3 upset, and obviously, if Maryland were to play Yale, that's a much easier second-round opponent, even if they were to beat LSU. So Yale's obviously not terrible. Even if they get to that point, that's part of what makes this tournament interesting is that Maryland doesn't have to be phenomenal, but say they get a little luckier and they play Temple, or say Belmont just has a poor shooting night and they advance, and Yale could pull an upset, and it's like, well, gee, Maryland should win that game, and you could see them right there in the Sweet 16. Michigan State could play Minnesota in the second round, Maryland in the third round, realistically. So just it's interesting. I'm not going to have, again, I have Belmont moving on to beat Maryland, but, could Maryland get a little lucky? Could Maryland beat LSU realistically? Yes. I think LSU as a 3 seed is a little bit much, to be honest. So Maryland at their best, could they beat LSU? Absolutely. I don't think that would be an insane upset at all. That's what makes picking the tournament so difficult, is that we can be flip-floppy on Maryland saying, oh, yeah, they could lose in the first round, but one thing goes their way this opening weekend, and you could see them in the Sweet 16. And it wouldn't shock me at all. They're talented, and they can shoot threes, and they've got good guards, and they've got NBA bigs, and they're for a good team. They've been in the top 25 basically all year long, so wouldn't surprise me at all to see them against Michigan State, even though I have them losing in the first round, if that makes any sense. But that's what makes the tournament.
It makes sense, youngster, but I know people are talking about Yale and Yale this and Yale that, but
yeah.
If you ever watch LSU play, I don't know how they're going to compete with LSU inside, Kevin. I don't.
Right. Again, that's something you have to look at.
If LSU has any type of game plan, they're going to feed that ball into the post for 35 minutes. Now, if Yale slows this game down, frustrates LSU, and makes it a possession-for-possession game, could they hang in there? I think so. But I just don't know how Yale is going to compete inside with LSU, which means that Yale is going to have to be so efficient on offense, because LSU, in my opinion, is going to limit them to one and done. So they're going to have to shoot the lights out, because they're not going to pound it in the post and beat LSU at that game. They're going to have to be shooting from the outside, and they're going to have to be good at it. And they are. I mean, they're in the NCAA tournament. But in my mind, I look at this game, and I know that people are saying, I don't see it. I just don't see it. I mean, LSU is battle-tested. LSU has played some really good teams.
Yeah.
LSU, in my mind, I'm not going to say they're beating them by 20, because Yale will try to slow this down and make it a possession-for-possession game. But I don't see LSU losing this game, youngster. I really don't.
No, I think LSU. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
I was just going to say, I think LSU is a bit overrated as a 3. Maybe they're a 4. But Yale is Yale. They're not this. I can't even call them a 14 seed darling because that's just ridiculous. They're not one of the best 14 seeds you've seen in your life. I don't know honestly why people are talking them up as much as they are. Because I was looking into them against Harvard in that Ivy League final, and it was kind of neck and neck, and they weren't necessarily looking like the more dominant team. They just won the tournament final, and that's, they're in. So I don't know. I'm not necessarily buying all the hype on Yale like some others are.
Yeah, that's all I got. So we can move on to our next seed here in the Big Ten.
Yeah, also in the East, like we have mentioned before, number 10, Minnesota, plays number 7, Louisville. And before I get into my stuff, I'll let you somewhat take the first stab at this one, Troy. But the one thing I wanted to mention is the whole Pitino thing, where Rick Pitino has been fired from Louisville and his little brother is coaching Minnesota. And so it would certainly be nice for the Pitino family to see Minnesota upset, quote-unquote, Louisville here in the 10-7 matchup, and then again the winner basically plays Michigan State. But I'll let you take the first stab at it, if you will.
Well, Minnesota to me, and it's funny because I don't talk about Minnesota football anymore. So now you're making me talk about Minnesota basketball. You sent me a little sarcastic text there about Minnesota after they beat Purdue. Minnesota might be my nemesis since I actually hail from the state of Wisconsin. But Minnesota can play good basketball. They proved it against Purdue. And they put together a good enough resume to get in. They had some big wins at the end of the year. The problem with Minnesota is that they can play like a bottom dweller at times. They're like night and day. When they're playing good basketball, they can compete with the top teams. But if they're not playing that way, they look like an average basketball team. So that's what scares me in this game about wanting to pick Minnesota. It's like, which Minnesota team is going to show up? Because I know there's a team in Minnesota that can beat Louisville, but I also know there's a team that can poo the bed, and Louisville will walk all over them. This, to me, Kevin, will probably be one of my last picks. It will probably be one of my last picks. Because, like I said, I've seen Minnesota play really good basketball, but I've seen them play putrid basketball. And that scares me when I look at a tournament team. There's no consistency. This is that game where brackets can get busted because of Minnesota. Because, like I said, if they're playing really good basketball, if they play like they played against Purdue, could you see them in the Sweet 16? Yeah, you could. But you could also see them bowing out to Louisville in the first round and getting beat by 15.
Yeah.
That's the difference in Minnesota. It's not like, well, they're going to play you tough and, they could lose by 1 or 2. No. Minnesota's either going to win this game or they're going to get blown out.
Yeah.
It's one or the other. So that's where my dilemma is with Minnesota. They could beat Louisville, but they could also get blown out. And I just don't know which way to go right now. My mind is definitely going to have to change by Wednesday night, though. So we'll see what happens then. That's all I have on Minnesota, Kevin. I don't know with them. I don't know what to expect when they hit the court. Yeah.
Like you said, they're inconsistent. That's the way with a lot of these 6 seeds, 7 seeds, 8, 9, 10, 11. They're inconsistent unless they're a mid-major 11. Then it's like, oh damn, they're pretty good. There's a reason why a mid-major is an 11, not a 15, because they're pretty good, or they won 30 games, or like UC Irvine is a 13 seed. They won 30 games this year. Like they're a 13, they're not a 14, 15, 16 for a reason. So they're not a 7, but those mid-majors that are like 13s, 12s, especially 11s, those are the really dangerous ones, because those are the teams that obviously display that they can basically dominate their level of competition. I mean, that's basically the case for it. But anyway, Louisville, Minnesota, it looks like, according to my bracket here, and I don't have my bracket fully filled out yet, there are certain games I have penciled in, so to say. But I initially clicked on Louisville to beat Minnesota, and I did more research on it. And Louisville, because I watched, as a Duke fan, I've seen Louisville a few times. I saw the game where Louisville was up 20 on Duke, and they ended up collapsing and losing. So I know that Louisville can be very good. But, again, there's the part of Louisville that's not all that fantastic either. Like, again, Louisville's talented. They're right there with Minnesota, no question about it. But in their last 12, they're 4-8. And within that 4-8 is a loss to Duke. And after the loss to Duke, I think they beat Clemson by 3, and I think they beat Boston College twice. I think that's 3 of their wins, or Notre Dame twice. I think it's Notre Dame twice, who was a bottom dweller in the ACC. So Louisville, since that collapse to Duke, has absolutely not been the same, which I think is interesting. And again, they're 4-8 in their last 12. So I mean, it's not a team that's playing well. That being said, I also want to mention that a few years ago, I think it was South Carolina who made it as like a 7 seed to the Final Four, and they were 3-9 in their last 12, or 4, and it was something ridiculous. It was like, wow, this team is playing bad going into the tournament. But they started hot, like they were 15-2, and then they finished like 3-11, and it was like, wow, this team's doing terrible. And then they made it to the Final Four anyway. So I always love it when people are like, well, you got to win your conference tournament, or you got to do really good in your conference tournament, or, oh, let's look at your last 10. That's something, but it's not even everything. I mean, yes, you can say Louisville's not been playing well as of late, but what's to say, they know they're a more talented team, and the wheels kind of fall off a game or two here, and, all of a sudden you're looking at 4-8 in your last 12, but now that it's the NCAA tournament, they know they can compete and be up by 20 on Duke.
Records don't matter right now, youngster.
Right.
I mean,
it's just one game at a time.
They don't.
Yeah.
It's one game.
It's just one game at a time. Yep.
You got to win one game. It doesn't matter if you won 18 games, 30 games. That doesn't matter. It's what are you going to do when you step on the court in that first-round game? That's the game that matters.
Yeah.
And, I know you go over the last 12, and I look at some of that, but really, like, okay, Purdue lost their only game in the Big Ten tournament. Are they now a terrible team?
Right.
Honestly, we talked about it last week. Does it matter? I mean, really, for the teams that were locked in the NCAA tournament, did it really matter what they did in the Big Ten tournament? Michigan and Michigan State put a couple more games on their legs. Purdue, they lost. Oh, well. I know Carson Edwards has an injury. That is more to me the issue than Purdue losing. Purdue lost their
first game in the Big Ten tournament, and they're still a 3 seed. That goes to show how much it mattered.
And now they didn't have to get extra game time on their legs. So I do look at the last 12 or the last 10, whatever they have on the computer, just to kind of get a look. But like you said, that South Carolina, if people are just going, oh, well, they're 3-9 in their last 12, they're not going to win this game. If you're prepared to play in the tournament and you start getting confidence and your team is playing well, that's what the tournament is all about. It doesn't matter what you did in your last 12. So also records can be deceiving. I mean, you can go through and look at it with a fine-tooth comb like you're looking at Louisville. Those wins aren't so impressive, but you got to look at the losses. Were they relatively close games? Were they blowouts? I mean, there's so much that goes into it. I mean, a team could be 3-9, but lose 8 of those 9 games by, one basket. Does that mean they're terrible? No, a missed three-pointer, a rebound, an offensive rebound here or there, and maybe they win those games, and instead of being 3-9, they're 9-3.
Right.
So just looking at the record, folks, if you're going to look at records, if you're going to go back and say, whoa, this team is 5-7 in their last, look at the 7 losses. And also look at the 5 wins. Who did they beat? If there's big wins in there, for example, Minnesota, Kevin, to me, an inconsistent team, but, man, they got 2 big wins here at the end of the season.
Yeah.
That's why I'm torn on this game. If you told me right now I need to pick a winner, I'd be like, I'm mute. I don't know. Where's my coin? I'll flip the coin. That's where I'm at on Monday afternoon. I have no idea. Because if you would have asked me before the tournament, before the Big Ten tournament, I probably would have picked Louisville. But now that Minnesota derailed Purdue, even with an injured Carson Edwards, it doesn't matter. They went on and played really good basketball against Purdue. Yeah. So there's my dilemma. But a week ago, I would have said Minnesota's going down. But now I don't know. That's all I got.
I hear you. One stat, you brought it up, looking at, last 10, last 12, whatever. One stat people are throwing out there is, Iowa's 1-5 in their last 6. Talking about Iowa-Cincinnati, different region. But Iowa plays Cincinnati in the first round, and it's like, Iowa's 1-5 in the last 6. Well, Iowa was up 9 against Nebraska with a minute left and lost. That doesn't mean Iowa's a bad team. Also, Iowa was without their coach for 3 games. So you can't necessarily, again, just looking at wins, losses it's not necessarily doing your due diligence. And, you only have so much information at hand. But if you're really looking at a super crazy upset or really diving into a matchup, really look at it. Because, again, just looking at last 10, last 12, Iowa 1-5, not necessarily the whole story. So just wanted to mention it. Also, one thing I wanted to mention was Maryland. Maryland, their first game against either Belmont or Temple is on Thursday. And Louisville, Minnesota, I believe, is the first game on Thursday. I think it's the first game of the tournament. That's at, I think, 12:15 p.m. Eastern.
So who does that winner possibly play there, youngster?
They play 2:15. Michigan State is the 2. Bradley is the 15. So look at that. Perfect little segue there to Michigan State in the East region, top left corner.
You like that?
Following along. Yes, I do. I do like that. So Minnesota, you could see a quote-unquote upset there, seed-wise, over Louisville, and then they would play Michigan State or Bradley. And Troy, I honestly didn't even look at Bradley. I literally just, on my notes here.
Do you even have to say Michigan State or Bradley? I'm sorry. If Michigan State loses to Bradley, I'll say this on the air, Izzo needs to retire.
8, Michigan State lost as a 2 seed a few years ago. But Michigan State lost as a 2 seed.
Kevin, this team, in my mind, if they lose to Bradley, that whole coaching staff just needs to go into solitude. I'll put it this way: there's a 0.001 chance Bradley wins this game. I'm sorry. I mean, I know we got to say or because we host the show, but I'm going to tell you what. If you look at the brackets, and there might be somebody out there that will pick Bradley over Michigan State, but we followed Michigan State all year. So tell me, Kevin, are they losing to Bradley? No. They're not losing to Bradley. Not the way that Michigan State plays. I mean, we look at the Big Ten standings. We followed them all year. They had their hills. They had their valleys. They were up and down. And now at the end of the year, Izzo's got them playing tournament basketball. I'm not saying that I'm going to pick them all the way to the final, but there's no way in the world they're losing to Bradley. Now watch them lose. But
exactly.
We have followed this team all year, Kevin. We followed this team for 3 months.
I've watched more Michigan State than any team other than Duke. And again, I'm a Duke fan. But I've seen more Michigan State than anyone.
And so all that watching you did, tell me how Bradley can beat Michigan State.
Again, I didn't even look at Bradley.
They would have to shoot 80% from the field. And even then, I don't know if it'll be enough.
Yeah.
Because everybody in the country, they're talking about Texas Tech defense. They're talking about Virginia defense. Where's Michigan State? And they're talking about Michigan defense, right?
Yep.
Why does nobody talk about Michigan State defense? You've watched them play, Kevin. They can lock you down. They can get after you on the outside, and they can dominate you on the inside. Bradley has no answer for Michigan State. Even if they shot 80%, I don't see Michigan State going down, youngster. I had to be that bold. I'll go out on the show. I know you're probably not supposed to do that, probably not proper etiquette, but I don't care about etiquette. No way in the world is Bradley beating Michigan State.
Yeah, I'm with you. One site I want to point people to, also looking for potential upsets, is kenpom.com. It's based on Ken Pomeroy. I don't know if you listeners have heard of him or not. Some of you, I'm sure, have.
But I actually follow him on Twitter.
Yeah, he's awesome. I always look at kenpom.com this time of year. He's got a lot of efficiency ratings for teams, and I can look right here very quickly. Michigan State, offensive efficiency, 4th in the entire country. Defensively, 8th in the entire country. Michigan State is damn good. They're top 8 in both offense and defense. Again, that's damn good. Duke is 6th offensively, 6th defensively. Gonzaga, 1st offensively, 16th defensively. Being top 8 in both is absurdly impressive. I tweeted out, again, my top 5 teams before the tournament, and I said Duke 1, Gonzaga 2, North Carolina 3, and I said Michigan State was 4. So Michigan State was 4, and then I put Virginia as 5. Doesn't necessarily mean that I think Virginia I absolutely think Virginia is more prone to losing than maybe who I think my 6th best team is, but regardless, I think Michigan State is one of the 4 best teams in the country. So, anyway, that's just the way I see it. Not saying they deserved a number 1 over a team that got a number 1 seed. People talking about Michigan State instead of Gonzaga, which, again, I think is ridiculous because I think Gonzaga has been a top 2 team all year long. They've won every single game in their last 20 games by double digits, other than literally
I'm going to interrupt you right there, Kevin, because I hear that all the time. Gonzaga lost, Michigan State won, so Michigan State should have been. We do a Big Ten show, and Gonzaga should have been a number 1 seed.
Yep.
You don't base it off one game. It's basketball.
If there was a
one seed, what happens in one game? Virginia goes down in one game as a number 1 seed. It's one game. Gonzaga, as a body of work, deserved to have a number 1 seed. Michigan State, as a body of work, did not, because they had a bunch of valleys in the middle of the season.
They had a 3-game losing
streak. They didn't deserve it.
Right. Gonzaga killed everybody, and they even beat Duke. Michigan State can't say that. So, anyway, people maybe forget that Gonzaga beat Duke, and maybe people don't know that Gonzaga crushed everyone by double digits for 20 straight games, literally, until the West Coast Conference Final, where they lost 1 game. God forbid to St. Mary's, who's always in the tournament anyway.
St. Mary's is a good team. St. Mary's is a very good team. I mean, you just look at that conference again. You got St. Mary's and Gonzaga, and sprinkle in a few dreamers every once in a while. But that's a conference that Gonzaga should roll through. But the thing is, Kevin, they didn't squeak by. They weren't winning on last-second 3-pointers. They weren't winning by 4 points. They were dominating like they should have. I mean, didn't you mention that you thought Gonzaga could go undefeated all the way to the tournament earlier in the year, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, and they slipped up, I think it was 3 times total. But if you go player by player, there's no team that's more talented than Gonzaga, and that includes Duke. I'm dead serious. If you just go player by player, Gonzaga's 6th man, 7th man, 8th man, Gonzaga's the better overall team. And Duke shoots the 3 ball like hell. They're terrible from 3 as a team. There are certain guys who can shoot it well, but Gonzaga's 3-point shooting compared to Duke's, it's unbelievable. It's night and day. Gonzaga's way better from 3. And Gonzaga's got more really good players than Duke does. You can say Zion, R.J. Barrett all you want, and Trey Jones is a great point guard. Cam Reddish is underappreciated as a 2, but Gonzaga's got more really good players than Duke does. I mean, so anyway, not saying Gonzaga can't lose to Syracuse in the second round, because Michigan State lost to Syracuse in the second round last year. Syracuse is just annoying to play. But
we'll talk about that when we get to that Syracuse region. I mean, that defense that Boeheim has, I mean, that causes fits, and if you're not used to it, you can't prepare for it. You cannot prepare for it. It's unbelievable, youngster, that we're sitting here. We're going to talk about the East region, the Big Ten teams, and we went off and just talked a bunch of other college basketball during the show. And so we're approaching the hour mark, and that is nowhere near where we wanted to be. You and I can sit and talk college basketball from now until 6 a.m. without even missing a beat. I mean, literally, you and I could probably stay on this phone until 6 a.m., maybe grab a bite to eat in between, maybe take a little bathroom break. But, knowing us, we'd probably talk while we're going to the bathroom, and eating. So that's our East region, folks. We gave you a little recap on Maryland. Kevin and I both think that Maryland, well, I'll put it this way. We both think if Belmont wins, that Maryland is probably going to lose to Belmont. Sure. I believe if they're playing Temple, I think Maryland can move on. I don't believe Michigan State is going to lose at all against Bradley. And so in the second round, they could face another Big Ten foe in Minnesota, depending on what Minnesota team shows up. So if you're looking for some heavy knowledge today about who to pick in that 7-10 game, sorry, I couldn't give it to you, because it is a toss-up. It is a legitimate toss-up. Both teams, in my mind, Kevin, mirror images of each other. Maybe both poo-the-bed teams show up and we have like a 41-39 game. But maybe both good teams show up and we have an 82-76 game. I mean, that is how horrid and night and day both of these teams can be. Yeah. And that's why that game is so hard to pick.
Yeah. Last thing I wanted to touch on with this region is, again, we're only looking at the first weekend, a.k.a. first and second round. So Michigan State playing Minnesota. Again, I have Michigan State moving on. Like I just said, I think they're the 4th best team in the country overall. Can Minnesota play really well and beat them? Absolutely. One thing I'll say is that Minnesota plays a lot better at home than they do on the road, and this is all neutral court stuff. So, it favors Michigan State a little bit in that sense. I think Minnesota is better at home, respectively, than Michigan State is. AKA, I think Michigan State plays better on the road than Minnesota does. That's basically all I'm saying. Can Minnesota pull off a shocking upset, make the Sweet 16? Sure, they could. Is it likely to happen? No. Is it unlikely to happen? No, it's even worse than that. It's very unlikely. But, just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Minnesota's not beating Michigan State either.
We both have Michigan State confidently moving past Bradley and then Louisville or Minnesota.
Michigan State's in the Sweet 16. I mean, there's just, you went over it, the offensive efficiency, and then the defense nobody talks about. Everybody wants to talk about all the big dogs. Well, in my mind, Michigan State is a big dog defense. They get after you. Again, we've watched them all year. I would say there's a 1% chance that Michigan State does not make the Sweet 16. So there's your pick, folks. You want to lock? We usually lock in NFL or in college football. My lock in the NCAA Tournament, Michigan State in the Sweet 16. So pick against me, which means they're not going to make it. If you know anything about my prediction prowess, it's sometimes not very good. But other than that, youngster, what else you got for the listeners? Otherwise, we can let them mosey on along until tomorrow when we go over another region.
Yeah, that's it. Again, check out @YoungsterOldMan for all of our regions that will be posted. Follow us on Twitter @YoungsterOldMan. Check out the Grueling Truth.
And so they can get in the bracket.
Absolutely. Get in the bracket. It's fun for free. But, obviously you can talk crap after you beat us with your bracket or lose to us miserably like you probably will because we're experts. So, just talking a little trash.
maybe the puppet master over there, you, is an expert. I'm just an old man that, just says what comes to my mind.
I'll say this seriously to close this East region. I watch more college basketball than the average person does, and I talk about it. I write about it. I follow it, and I know more than most of the listeners listening to the show. That's not a brag. That's just me putting more hours into college basketball than most of you listening. That's just, the way it is. Like your job, whoever's listening, you're better at your job than I would be. Why? Because you put the hours into it. You know your job better than I do. That's not a shot at me. That's not gloating for you guys, but that's just the way it is. I just put the time in. That being said, this is March Madness, and any crazy upset can happen, and me saying, hey, look, I spend all this time looking at college basketball. Like I said about an hour ago, someone who doesn't watch college basketball at all could put together a bracket better than me. That's what makes it fun, I think, because it's not just about the brainiac nerd in the corner sitting here, looking at every possible matchup. At the end of the day, upsets are going to happen that you don't see, and, some crazy stuff happens. And sometimes when the idiot picks all the number 1 seeds to go through and all the 2 seeds to go through to the Elite Eight, and 7 of them make it, and you're like, oh, what the heck, you got to pick upsets. Well, at the end of the day, maybe that person that didn't watch a single game of college basketball all year gets a better bracket than you do. So
sometimes you can overthink it, youngster. Sometimes you can overthink it. And you got to go with your gut once in a while. Like that 7-10 Louisville, Minnesota game. It's going to come down to a gut feeling on Wednesday night. Because there are no facts, there are no stats that is going to point the arrow to one team or the other. Unlike Michigan State. You have factual, statistical evidence that Michigan State should roll into the Sweet 16. But again, it's basketball. It's basketball. And, who knows? Maybe Bradley does go to shoot 80% from the field and rebounds Michigan State. It could happen. Right. But statistically, it's not happening. But other than that, make sure you follow us on Twitter at Youngster Old Man. Get into our bracket, which is Go Big or Go Home. For the youngster, I am the old man. Enjoy the night, everyone. We'll get back at you actually tomorrow with another region. Have a good day.